Trump's latest threats against BRICS nations are crumbling before our eyes, and the results are devastating for American economic dominance. While the president wages his chaotic tariff war, BRICS countries are building something that could fundamentally destroy the foundation of U.S. financial power. We're witnessing what Canadian mining mogul Frank Giustra calls the end of the paper gold era, a seismic shift that Trump's bumbling trade policies have only accelerated. Speaking at the Precious Metals Summit in Beaver Creek, Colorado, Giustra delivered a stark warning about our financial future. If you own paper gold, you do not own gold. When the crunch comes, it will not be there. This isn't just market speculation. It's a direct consequence of Trump's reckless approach to international trade, pushing half the world away from dollar-based systems. The numbers tell a devastating story for Trump's America First agenda. BRICS nations now represent 45% of the world's population and 35% of global GDP. These aren't small players that Trump can bully into submission. They're building a parallel financial universe that completely bypasses American control. China and its BRICS partners are constructing what amounts to a shadow banking system spanning payments, settlements, depositories, and swap lines, all designed to operate without touching a single U.S. dollar. Trump's response has been predictable: more threats, more tariffs, more chaos. In November, he threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS countries if they dared create alternatives to the dollar. By July, he was promising 10% tariffs on any nation aligning with what he called anti-American policies. But here's what Trump doesn't understand. His threats are having the opposite effect. Every tariff threat pushes these nations closer together. Every sanction accelerates their desire to build dollar-free alternatives. Economic analysts warn that weaponization of the dollar and threatening arbitrary tariffs would push countries toward alternatives.
Yeah, and really simply, the founding document in the United States is our Constitution. And the Constitution specifically says that the power to tariff rests with Congress. So that is their power. Congress gave some of that power to the president under really specific laws. The one law that they didn't give the president that power is under his emergency powers. And so President Trump is the first president to ever use this emergency power in an attempt to implement tariffs, and he did it in a way that is contrary and at odds with all of the other statutes and laws that were passed by Congress to do tariffs. So it's pretty simple. It's an abuse of an emergency power in a way that Congress didn't intend, and therefore all of those actions are unconstitutional.
Instead of heeding these warnings, Trump has doubled down on threats and intimidation, accelerating the very de-dollarization he claims to oppose. The centerpiece of this anti-dollar revolution is something called BRICS Pay, a decentralized payment system that lets member countries trade in their own currencies without ever touching the American financial system. This isn't theoretical anymore. China has fully backed the system, and it's designed to make SWIFT, the Western-dominated global payment network, obsolete. As Giustra put it, it basically puts SWIFT back into the Stone Age. The irony is breathtaking. Trump claims he's protecting American interests, but his aggressive tariff policies have created the very threat he's trying to prevent. Countries that might have remained within the dollar system are now actively building alternatives because they can't trust America not to weaponize its financial dominance. Even more damaging for Trump's narrative is what's happening with gold. Record bullion prices are proving Giustra's point about physical assets eclipsing paper contracts. Central banks worldwide are hoarding metal, governments are testing non-dollar payment systems, and the traditional Western financial architecture is showing cracks that Trump's policies have only widened. The Shanghai Gold Exchange now offers yuan for gold convertibility. New physical delivery vaulting systems are spreading across Hong Kong. Plans for more warehouses are expanding globally. This is infrastructure designed to operate completely independently of American oversight, and Trump's threats are only accelerating its development. Trump's fundamental misunderstanding of global economics is on full display here. He thinks he can bully nations into submission with tariff threats, but he's dealing with countries that have options. Former Canadian ambassador to China, Guy Saint-Jacques, recently analyzed this as Trump's admission that he needs help after diplomatic setbacks with Russia.
It's interesting. It's an admission on the part of Trump that he needs help to achieve his goal. And I think there is an opening for Canada and allies to say, okay, if you need our help, well, let's work together. But we need to be clear on what exactly we are trying to achieve here. And for instance, we would need a clear confirmation on the part of the U.S. that they would provide security. They would give security guarantees to Ukraine to prevent further invasion from Russia. But we need a lot more details on what exactly would happen, because right now what Trump is asking us to do is do the heavy lifting for him. He has not said himself that he would increase the tariffs that he has already applied to China, because he knows that, in fact, China would immediately stop exporting rare earths and magnets to the U.S. So it's an interesting opening, but we should try to clarify and come up with a better game plan than what Trump has enunciated so far.
When Trump threatens India with 50% tariffs, New Delhi doesn't capitulate. It reaches out to China with an olive branch. When he targets Vietnam with massive levies, Beijing immediately steps in with 45 new cooperation agreements. The president's own economic advisors should be terrified by what's unfolding. The M-Bridge system, a cross-border central bank digital currency pilot launched by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE, with Saudi Arabia recently joining, allows participants to settle in local currencies rather than dollars. This is a direct assault on the dollar's reserve currency status, and Trump's aggressive policies are pushing more countries toward this alternative every day. Meanwhile, the broader geopolitical picture reveals Trump's strategic failures. As retired Department of National Defense official Andrew Rousoulos recently noted, Russia continues to advance militarily despite various sanctions and economic measures.
In terms of that meeting of G7 finance ministers, what kind of economic pressures could the G7 put on Russia to ramp up the pressure?
Again, not much. They're talking about various assets being, Russian frozen assets being, the money's taken from that, used to finance the Ukrainian war effort. Fine, you can do that. Ukraine will get more money. Great, they can buy more weapons. But what's the bottom line to all this? The Russians are winning the war on the ground and in the air, and the only way that the Europeans, the Ukrainians, Canadians, Americans are trying to pressure the Russians to stop, never mind stop, is economics. And on that one, that's a tough road for them to actually succeed in pushing the Russians to where they want them to be. The Russians have the full support of China, India as well. They have multiple workarounds in place. So I think this is a bit, if I might say, a desperate attempt by the West to pressure the Russians to come to a ceasefire and stop on the road to defeating Ukraine.
The G7's limited economic pressure options against Russia have proven ineffective, with Russia maintaining strong economic partnerships with China and India that provide workarounds to Western sanctions. Against this backdrop, Trump's strategy appears to rely on dollar stablecoins, digital tokens backed by short-term treasuries. But as Justra points out, once enough debt sits inside those reserves, Washington could devalue the dollar, devastating holders of cash and dollar stablecoins while pushing hard assets like gold and metal producers higher. It's a scenario that benefits everyone except ordinary Americans holding dollar-denominated assets. The geopolitical implications are staggering. Trump's tariff war has created what economists call mutual vulnerability, but not in America's favor. While the U.S. threatens economic punishment, BRICS nations are building resilient alternatives that could eventually make American sanctions irrelevant. The president's own trade data reveals the failure of his approach. During Trump's first-term trade war, China's exports to the U.S. fell from 19.23% to 14.67%, and that decline continues accelerating. Instead of bringing manufacturing back to America, Trump's policies simply redirected Chinese trade toward other partners, many of whom are now BRICS members or partner countries. What's particularly damaging is how Trump's threats are strengthening BRICS unity. The organization was originally designed as a loose coalition of emerging economies. Trump's aggressive stance has transformed it into something approaching a genuine anti-Western alliance. Countries that might have remained neutral are now actively seeking BRICS membership as insurance against American economic warfare. The expansion numbers are devastating for Trump's narrative. Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the UAE joined as full members in 2024. Indonesia became the 10th member in 2025. 13 additional nations signed on as partner countries, with more than 50 countries reportedly expressing interest in joining. This isn't the isolated alliance of rogue states that Trump portrays. It's becoming a genuine alternative power center. Even more concerning for American interests is how Trump's policies are pushing traditional allies toward BRICS alternatives. Countries that have historically aligned with the West are now hedging their bets, developing relationships with BRICS nations as insurance against unpredictable American trade policies. Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent visit to Mexico to meet with President Claudia Sheinbaum exemplifies this trend, with nations focusing on maximizing existing agreements and coordinating approaches to handle American trade disruptions.
So I think what we're looking at in Mexico is not really negotiating a new deal, partly because Canada still has both the CUSMA agreement that includes Mexico, but also the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, which includes both Canada and Mexico as parties. So there's already a significant amount of market access. What we're likely to be focused on is Canada and Mexico aligning on strategy in terms of handling the American disruptions and handling bilateral trade between the two parties that are separated by this kind of buffer state of the United States, because there is still a reasonably large amount of trade that happens bilaterally between the two countries.
With the trade that does already happen between these two countries, how high would you say the stakes are for this particular meeting?
So I think for the stakes for the trading relationship, probably not the highest. Again, because there is a relatively strong relationship already between the two different free trade agreements. I think the biggest issue here is going to be how the two countries coalesce and whether or not they can agree to kind of work together in terms of negotiating with the American government, especially on the sectoral sanctions. I mean, the auto market in particular is one that is very heavily diversified between the three different countries, with one vehicle often crossing a dozen, 24 times between the three before it's.
The economic modeling is clear about where Trump's approach leads. According to analysis by the Peterson Institute for International Economics, imposing 100% tariffs on BRICS countries would leave U.S. GDP $432 billion lower than without the tariffs, while raising the overall price level by 1.6%. Meanwhile, BRICS countries would likely retaliate with their own measures, creating a downward spiral that benefits no one, except perhaps the gold miners and physical asset holders that Justra represents. The president's threats also reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of modern economics. Trump seems to believe that countries have no choice but to accept American terms, but the world has become increasingly multipolar. Nations have alternatives now, and Trump's aggressive approach is pushing them to use those alternatives faster than they might have otherwise. Perhaps most damaging is how Trump's approach undermines the very dollar dominance he claims to protect. The dollar's strength comes partly from global confidence in American leadership and predictability. When the President of the United States threatens arbitrary 100% tariffs based on social media posts, he erodes that confidence and accelerates the search for alternatives. The gold market surge that Justra describes isn't just about precious metals, it's about investors and central banks losing faith in paper assets backed by increasingly unreliable political systems. When the president threatens economic warfare via social media posts, it sends a message that dollar-denominated assets might not be as stable as previously assumed. Trump's defenders might argue he's playing three-dimensional chess, but as Justra noted, I just don't see it. What we see instead is a president whose impulsive threats are accelerating exactly the trends he claims to oppose. Every tariff announcement pushes more countries toward BRICS alternatives. Every sanction threat encourages more development of dollar-free payment systems. The timing couldn't be worse for American interests. At a moment when the U.S. needs to maintain its economic alliances and preserve dollar dominance, Trump's approach is fragmenting the global economy in ways that benefit America's rivals. China, Russia, and other BRICS nations are positioning themselves as stable alternatives to an increasingly erratic American leadership. The infrastructure being built by BRICS nations isn't temporary or easily reversible. Payment systems, gold exchanges, and currency swap arrangements create lasting alternatives to American financial dominance. Once these systems are operational and trusted, rolling them back becomes nearly impossible, even if future American leadership adopts more cooperative approaches. What makes Trump's failure even more stark is how predictable it was. Economic analysts warned that weaponizing the dollar and threatening arbitrary tariffs would push countries toward alternatives. Instead of heeding these warnings, Trump has doubled down on threats and intimidation. The president's approach also ignores the lessons of recent history. American sanctions against Russia after its invasion of Ukraine were effective precisely because they were multilateral and targeted. Trump's scattered threats against dozens of countries for various perceived slights dilute American economic power and encourage target nations to build collective defenses. As we watch gold prices surge and BRICS payment systems develop, we're witnessing the consequences of Trump's chaotic approach to international economics. The America First agenda has become America alone, with former partners and allies seeking alternatives to an increasingly unpredictable American economic relationship. The sad irony is that Trump's stated goal, preserving American economic dominance, might have been achievable through cooperative leadership and strategic alliance building. Instead, his threat-based approach is creating the very multipolar world order that challenges American supremacy. Frank Justra's warning about the end of paper gold may be just the beginning. If Trump's policies continue pushing the world toward BRICS alternatives, we might be witnessing the beginning of the end of American financial hegemony, brought about not by enemy action, but by self-inflicted wounds from a president who confused bullying with leadership. The question isn't whether BRICS will continue building dollar alternatives. Trump's policies have made that inevitable. The question is whether American leadership will recognize the damage being done and change course before the alternatives become so robust that dollar dominance becomes a historical footnote. Based on Trump's track record, that recognition seems unlikely to come from the current administration.